Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Have you ever wondered how the moon might affect your energy levels, or anything else for that matter? Well, this week I'm talking to Karen Skidmore all about the different ways in which we can embrace the ebb and flow of our natural energy cycles. It's not as woo-woo as it might sound, but there's definitely lots of personal anecdotes and different ways of thinking in this episode, so I really hope you'll enjoy it. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week I have Karen Skidmore with me. She's a business growth strategist, embodied business mentor with 20 plus years of experience running her own coaching companies and consultancies. And she's also an author of a book that we both came across each other through Practical Inspiration Publishing. We both delivered books back in the pandemic, I think. So your book there is True Profit Breeds Business. And that was actually your second book, wasn't it, Karen? So I know you're also a menopause champion and a sound practitioner. So you're talking all about slowing down to help people achieve more. And I think that's a really interesting concept for us to think about. So we're looking at productivity from a different angle. Karen, over to you to position yourself and what you're expert in here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. Yes, and it's counterintuitive as it sounds. Slowing down absolutely does speed our success up. And this is where I've been coming from for many years. Really, it's come from a not very nice burnout that I experienced in my 40s, and recognizing that there wasn't a magic pill to take or vitamin supplement that could just make me feel better. I not only had to change the way that I was living and my lifestyle, I was recognizing that the way that I was working was negatively impacting me. I had a business that was outwardly looking very successful, but I was doing way too much tech, too much screen time, too much push, lots of launching of lots of programs. And I went through a really interesting, I say interesting now, at the time it was really painful, but it was, when I reflect back, it was a very interesting trial and error of, well, what kind of business models are going to suit me and my energy flow? And from there, that's when it started coming into my work as a business mentor, business growth strategist, of really recognizing that there are so many brilliant business models out there and ways of growing the business. And they work for some people, and yet they don't work for others. And often it will boil down to the person's individual energy flow and the way that their own operating systems work. And I just see just too many people are just misaligned with external versions of what success looks like, productivity, speeding up at a rate of knots, and doing work that they're just not aligned with. And when we can flip that equation around and actually go, what's going to work for us? That's where we achieve so much more success. So it is really about putting the brakes on sometimes, and sometimes actually getting off the whole thing for a short while to be able to then go, well, how can I move forward, feeling more aligned and more authentic to who I am becoming as I go through the decades.
It's really interesting because I was lucky enough to see you present at the HR Indies conference a few weeks ago. And what's unique, I think, or unusual about this angle that you're going at is that it's not productivity in terms of time management, although there is something about how do you and things, and it's also understanding what's important to you and purpose and feels like that as well. So it feels sort of, and also a little bit about understanding yourself. So it feels like it goes on what you're doing works on different levels in terms of the ebb and flow. I mean, I know we'll talk about that further in terms of how you understand what's important to you and what's interesting, etc. So when you were just, I suppose, in terms of starting off, you said you almost got to a burnout yourself. How did that happen? How did you recognize it? And are you recognizing that in other people as well?
Yes, yes, and yes. My burnout story is probably not unique. I lost my dad to cancer a couple of horrible years when I was 40, two young children, running a business, husband, full-time corporate job. And I was so much in my head. I didn't deal with the grief. I locked the grief up. And anybody who's had the experience of going through grief and not expressing it in a way and allowing the emotions to work through the process of grief will know that it has a habit of coming out at really ugly times. And I was so much in my head and so not connected myself. The red flags that, I look back now and I can see them all. I just ignored it. And this is what I just had begun to see now, that so many of us have almost got a burnout as a rite of passage. And we almost accept the fact that we've got aches and pains in our bodies, or we have indigestion problems, digestive problems, we have skin inflammations, and all of this will often come from an inflammation in our body, which has been caused by stress, which has been caused by cortisol. And we are just too busy to acknowledge that our body is often telling us, you're not well, you're not looking after yourself, you've got too much cortisol, too much inflammation in your body, you need to slow down. That we just keep pushing through, and then that's where burnout happens. And that's what happened to me, 2 years later. I couldn't get out of bed one weekend, and then I went down the path of logically trying to fix it. What's the pill I can take? What's the vitamin supplement? There must be stuff. And we're talking about, this was a long time ago now. But what am I now? I'm
I'm sure
55
lots
now.
of people are identifying with it.
Yeah. And back then there wasn't much around about menopause and perimenopausal symptoms. I mean, now thankfully there is a lot more. We are the education out there and the information that we've got at our fingertips now. But it was always trying to find a fix to my health problems, which then just keeps adding to the burnout.
Yeah.
Because we're just not in tune to what our bodies are telling us. So it's this coming out of our heads and being able to recognize that we have lost connection with our instinct, our intuition, from a lifestyle and health perspective, and it then massively filters into our business and leadership decisions as well, because success is so much heralded as a logic, pragmatic decisions, and this loss of instinct and intuition in our business and leadership is sorely lacking as well. So they go hand in hand, this burnout and lack of a lack of bringing oneself authentically into our leadership styles and the way that we are showing up in our work.
So with the when you use the term "in my head," or how would someone recognize? Because I think lots of people go, "I'm fine, and I'm just cracking on." And there's loads of people out here who will be looking after parents and children, and so have every bit of potential of the same sort of situation as you, and they think they're fine, or it's just like logicking your way through. So the being in your head, is that what you mean by that? I was just thinking it'd be good for you to share some. How would you know? So someone listening to this thinking, "I'm fine," how would you know that actually could be you being in your head? And what would be other examples of red flags? I think you talked about skin, the things that people might be ignoring. So allergies or skin conditions or lack of sleep, I guess.
Yeah, yes, and everything. Stress comes up in so many different forms, depending on who you are, what level of inflammation you've got in your body. But I love that question about how do you know if you're in your head? And actually, if the answer to that is I'm fine, that's a really good indication that you are in your head, because that's what I remember of everything going, it's all good. This is just being part of life. I've got a sore shoulder because I've been carrying a heavy bag, there would be a logical reason why there is a sore shoulder going on, or oh, I'm not feeling terribly well because oh, I've just eaten too much bread again, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I'm just going to have more coffee. And so it's you start making head-based decisions based on what you think you should be doing and what you ought to be doing. Um, and it's recognizing that head on a stick almost. I mean, I can share with you a very personal story where I really recognized how out of tune myself was with my body. I was at a workshop, a women's workshop, and on part of the journey of exploring like what is going on, how this is more than me just taking the right vitamin supplements here. And I remember it was a well-being workshop, and in a room of I don't know, it was probably about 50 or 60 of us, and we had a pelvic floor specialist come and talk to us in the afternoon. And so we were invited to lie on the yoga mats on the floor, and this pelvic floor specialist was took us through a process of connecting to our pelvic floors. And I was in this room, and everybody else, oh yeah, you can hear the sort of rumblings. Yeah, there's the pelvic floor. And I couldn't connect with my pelvic floor. I knew I had a pelvic floor area. I knew I had a pelvis. I have two arms, two legs. I'm fully able. But then lying on the floor, I suddenly realized I didn't have any, well, what I know now, neural pathways. I had no electrical signals going from my head instructing my pelvic floor to contract and release. And then, of course, the more stressed I got because I felt I was the only one in the room that couldn't access it, the more anxious I got. And
Yeah.
within 10, 15 minutes, I was sobbing because I realized I had no physical connection. I could not tell my muscles down in my pelvic floor area to contract and release. And it was then that was that moment where I am so disconnected with my body. This is crazy. This isn't right. So that is kind of like in an extreme situation. And pelvic floor issues is another big thing with women, is that it's okay to have I'm not probably too much information, but this is often what happens. It's fine.
Yeah.
A little bit of urine comes out every time I laugh or cry. That's just normal, isn't it? We can laugh about it, but it's actually a very serious thing that can happen to us. And if it's not corrected, can lead to significant health problems, particularly as we get into our 70s and 80s. So that moment for me was a great, horrible, but also real kick up the booty of going, this disconnect here. It's like,
So what did you do? How did you make the connection between that kind of disconnect? Because at that point, you're probably not feeling that resourceful about where you're going now. How did you get from there to actually we need to slow down to speed up, or the next stage of it, or getting into tune with your rhythms, etc.?
Yes, yeah. And actually, and I'd already, people were telling me, if I was going to, I mean, my GP wasn't terribly helpful, but going to speak to other people to help me, it was like meditate. You need to slow down, you need to rest. And I was really resistant to rest. And I think, again, I know this, I'm not alone in this, was that when somebody was telling me, you need to rest more, Karen, you need to stop rushing around and being busy. And remember, I mean, again, very typical woman in my 40s, two children at school. At one stage, they were both at different schools, particularly when they went on to secondary school. I had my mum to be worrying about because she was now by herself without my dad. So I was always on the go. There was always, from the minute of waking up, there was a mental to-do list going around of like, right, what we're cooking for dinner? Have I got that food in the fridge? Right, okay, like, come on, get your shoes on. Okay, let me go. And on to the next one, and thinking about what I was doing on the meeting. And you could hear my pace of voice going up and up and up and up and up. So that internal dialogue is going on. And so I was being given the advice is meditate. You need to rest. So on those two things, rest, I was very resistant to rest because in my mind, resting was unproductive. So again, I would tell you a little story. I used to be lying on the sofa, exhausted, when the kids had had their supper, lying on the sofa, just zoning out, watching TV. My husband would come home from work and I would immediately switch off the TV, jump up and look busy. And again, having those experiences of going, why am I resisting this rest? This is ridiculous. And of course, there'd be a little bit of banter. Oh, you've got your feet up again. Well, I've been, you'd have those tiredness conversations. I'm more tired than you. No, I'm more tired than you.
Yeah.
And those aren't helpful in relationship, because when you're both tired, it's very easy for your partner to be almost even a jokey way, but then you then get resistant to that rest. So that resisting rest was really hard. And then meditate, for someone like me to sit down who has got a ton of things that were going through our head all of the time, meditate and trying to think of nothing was, I just couldn't do it. Absolutely couldn't do it. So I went off and I was starting to experiment with all sorts of things, from reflexology, acupuncture, all sorts of different type of, how I suppose what you call alternative therapies, which is such a rubbish name for them, because they're not alternative, they're just not NHS medical therapies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But going off and looking at different ways of healing my body. And there were two things that really helped me. One was sound healing. Because I couldn't meditate, because I found it very difficult to settle and be still for more than 2 or 3 minutes. The first time I experienced a sound healing session, and for those of you who don't know what a sound healing is, gong baths, Tibetan bowls, any kind of sound meditation where you're invited to lie down and just simply listen to the sound. That sound allowed me to still my body, and it was the first time I was able to just lie there and what I know now is called receive, and just receive the energy of the bowls. My mind didn't shut up, it didn't suddenly still, but I found my body, my nervous system was able to relax. I then began to realize, well, this is a good way of meditating, because I don't have to do anything. I can just lie there and let somebody else play some sounds, play some music. So I went on and almost got addicted to sound healing. Like any sound bath that were going, I need more of this. It's really helped me reset my nervous system. And I actually then went on to qualify as a sound healing practitioner, because I just loved it so much. So now I play Himalayan bowls and I play sound for clients as a way of helping them reduce their nervous system as well. And the other thing that really worked for me was the journey into embodiment, which is the process of moving your body to music. And if anybody's afraid of, if I say the word dance, you either think, oh, I only dance when I'm in the kitchen by myself, or I've had a couple of gin and tonics out with my girlfriends, or whatever. But to do it in a room full of people when you're sober, and there isn't, it's not like that self-consciousness can be really hard. So I remember going along to my first embodiment session thinking, I just don't want to do this. There was every part of me just going, this is so uncomfortable. And
so
yet,
just to be clear, an embodiment session is a dance class to help you feel connected to your body or something, is it?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when I say the word dance, it does put people off, because they go, oh my God, I don't dance. So I like to explain it as moving your body to music in a particular way. So they are exercises to help unlock energy centers in your body and feel flow. So the embodiment really helped me be able to move my bodies in ways that I hadn't moved my body before. From calming the nervous system down with breathing exercises to the physical unlocking of my hips, which then went on to release a lot of emotions that I'd locked away from my dad's grief. So there's lots that happens.
I've heard that quite often, that the hips is where we keep emotion. I don't really understand why that would be. Is there any rationale as to why? But you do hear it.
Oh yeah, well, we have energy centers in our body, so you might hear them as chakras, energy centers, and our sacral energy center, which is in our pelvis area, is where we hold our emotions around money and wealth, and grief. And if we have and our energy centers, when we are in flow, when we are of good health and well-being and connected to oneself, they are all open and they flow. They go up and down our spine, from the top of our heads to the root, all the way down to our feet. And so when they're open and they're flowing and everything goes, it's all lovely and juicy. We will, as human beings, experience things that are uncomfortable, that we don't want to go there, and we block emotions in our body. But yes, grief is spiritually known as being connected in our hips. And as women, in particular here, where our sexual organs are, reproductive organs, our womb space, it can cause us significant health problems when we lock anger, grief in our hips. And so a lot of women can find, particularly now as we are sitting so much on our chairs and our desks at work, we can physically get locked, but also emotionally, spiritually locked in our hips. So being able to move our hips, and going back to your question earlier about how do I know if I'm stuck in my head, become conscious how you're walking. And I can always spot any man or woman stuck in their heads by the way that they're walking, because they're often very robotic and their hips ain't moving. Their hips are just going in a line. And men can sway their hips, absolutely, but women are designed to be moving their hips from side to side, because that's what then frees our energy and keeps us connected to our bodies. So this is where our hip energy is very, very interesting when you start looking at the energy centers and the chakras in our bodies. But coming back to the embodiment of moving the hips, it was teaching my hips how to move and how they're designed to move, not just sat in a chair, walking in a straight line from A to B, or sat in a car seat, or sat on a train commuting into a city centre. Our hips have got very, very stuck in the way that we operate now, as in this Western culture of working and sitting on our chairs and doing most of our sitting, most of our being during our day sitting. So yeah, it is fascinating when you start to really get under the hood of it all. You recognize how much healing can be done with a simple opening of being able to move our hips, and being able to, use music to unlock areas in our body and form new neural pathways.
So going back again then, so you talked about the pathways and you've linked that because you had the experience where you didn't have them, and then you've got to the point now where you're fully immersed in this. Has become part of who you are and what you speak about and things. So did you immediately go to, I'm going to try all kinds of alternative, as we defined earlier, medicines, or was this sort of something that you came across by accident? It feels like you knew you need to get better from your burnout. Did you try lots of things?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm very much of an engineer. So when I look at anything that I've done, I'm very systems and processes. What makes me very good as a business strategist. So why I am so good as a business mentor, business growth. I really understand processes and systems. And for me, anytime I'm trying to fix a business problem, there's got to be some systems and processes and how it will work. So I know that I am naturally inclined as an engineer to go in and explore options. So for me, going off and looking at different things is part of my curiosity. So that's where, when I recognized I was getting very little, if not no help from my GP, to the point that, I was told, look, you're a woman, you're going through the menopause, just get on and deal with it. No, you're too young to have HRT. And I was 44 at the time. And no, there's nothing you can take for your hot sweats. And no, just get on with it. I'm paraphrasing.
That's very outdated now, isn't it?
Yes, and I know that still happens today.
Yeah.
It still happens today. I thankfully we are hearing less of it, but it still does. So when I wasn't getting any Western medicine support, I had to go and look at, well, what else can I take from all the different things. And of course, once you go and look at something, you then look at something else and look at something else. I mean, kinesiology for me was massive. I mean, that really helped me going along. I found an amazing local kinesiologist who worked on my body energetically. And I didn't, I mean,
how is
at some point
different? Sorry, is that Reiki? Is that like Reiki, or is that the body movement thing? It's obviously movement. What's the kinesiologist?
Yeah, kinesiology is very similar to Reiki. It's working on energy. So you have a kinesiologist who will work on your body. But I have to say, lying on a kinesiologist couch, holding a pink crystal in my left arm, left hand, with a card or something, some words written on my heart with different color. There was points of going, what is, this feels really weird. This makes no sense at all. And yet it was helping me feel better. So there was lots of things that I was just going, and I used to call it woo-woo back then. Oh, it's all this woo-woo. I'm going along and having this crystals being placed on me, and this feels really weird. And my logic brain would going, what the hell are you going and doing here? And then my body brain would go, I need this. This is helping you feel calmer. This is helping you recover. This is helping you decrease your inflammation. This is helping you with your perimenopausal symptoms. You need to do more of this, please. So it's very interesting. Again, it's a bit like a Western versus Eastern approach to holistic health.
And going back to you being an engineer, you being sort of process person, this is almost the opposite. So I can see why you'd feel it would be woo-woo, but then that's where you've gone the other way then and said, actually, this should be part of our up here process to get ourselves being better using these sort of things. That's interesting. So tying that into these would all be things that you would say are examples of slowing down in order to be more productive. And I suppose the people who are listening, we have people, we're aimed at an HR audience, but many of which are women. So this podcast episode can work on a level of as an individual, but also for how we help others, I guess. And could you tie together how, these things you're talking about practically slowing down to be more productive? And also, could you just touch on, you talked about the cortisol, which of course is our stress hormone, and are these all things that you would expect to reduce? I know they say do meditation, but that doesn't work for everyone, to reduce cortisol and inflammation. Does that link together?
Absolutely. So our parasympathetic nervous system and our sympathetic nervous system, when we're on fight or flight, and cortisol is known as the death hormone. It's really scary what cortisol can actually do to our bodies when it shouldn't be there. It's designed there to help us run away from a big beast who is chasing us through the woods. It is not designed there as a crisis management tool to help us through our day-to-day work. So yes, anything, and this is the thing, there are so many options out there for people to look at and find out what's going to work for people. But what essentially how I've come into it, because it's like it's bringing this work into work and productivity in a corporate space as well, because it's very easy to think, well, there's no place for this in the world of work. There's no place for it. So what I put together was something called an ebb and flow system, which is about energy management. So you mentioned at the start about time management, and time management is important, absolutely. But we can't manage time because we can't make more of it and it never goes away. So recognizing that actually it's more productive to manage our energy. And when we start to harness our mother nature seasons, we recognize there's some different energies that we can approach different tasks, projects, marketing projects, whatever that might be. It's very interesting when we can start to recognize what energy that we can bring to a finance meeting, as opposed to a creative meeting, to opposed to team review meetings on day-to-day work. It opens up, it really does change the perspective on what we have been taught for the world of work for the last 40, 50, 60 years, that time is linear. We have a linear calendar. Everybody works Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, although it's probably now 8 till 8. And why do we still work on this sort of like factory style work situation? So there's a lot of unlearning for a lot of people to do around world of work, and recognizing that if we then start to ebb and flow and recognize that there are some days that we are not on it and we're not fiercely pushing through, if we're feeling that we need to lean back and actually take the task in hand on a different type of energy, we can actually have better results, even though it might feel like we're not going at it at a pace of 100 miles an hour. So there is a lot of unlearning to be done around productivity and task management and time management, and recognizing there are better ways of being able to harness our work pace, both ourselves as well as our teams and everybody else that works around us.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that starting with that awareness is key for people. And I suppose getting them to embrace this. I mean, I know you coach people, you've got your energy tracker, which we'll put a link to as well, which starts tying these in. I suppose, do you want to go into those in terms of some of it, the productivity habits that maybe people need to step away from, but then some other practical things, whether it is about identifying what your optimum cycle of productivity or energy is? Because I think that's something that people were really interested in when we saw you speak.
Yes, yeah. I think once you start to recognize that we work better in cycles and in rhythms, we have in our bodies work on a circadian rhythm, which a lot of people are kind of again logically aware of. But when you really tune into how the body, how our kidney functions at different times of the day, our liver kicks in at different times of the day, you start to recognize that our body is really in tune with that day and night cycle that we live on this planet, which I find absolutely fascinating, that our body has completely tuned in, and our heart and our lungs and different parts of our body will operate different things according to the time of day. We've also, as women, have this amazing cycle, our menstrual cycles, which often is never talked about in the world of work. You never talk about your period or anything like that. I think that is starting to change. I'm certainly hearing more of an embracing into that conversation, but recognizing that actually us as women, we've often been told to ignore the bleed part of our cycle and just to keep pushing through. Don't let anybody know that you've got a period because you might be not as productive on those days. When actually the bleed part of our cycles is a very intuitive, reflective part. It's the wintering part of our energy cycles when we look at it from a Mother Nature point of view, and actually can be very powerful, because when we go into a wintering energy, it is a deep reflection of tuning into intuition, our whispers in our body, the things that we hear, like give you some practical examples. In my gut, I knew I shouldn't have signed that contract. I just felt the energy in that room was wrong, and I didn't like what that person was saying, but you didn't say anything about it. Those things that come up, and then we squash them down because our logic head's going, don't say it, you'll get yourself into trouble, or it's inappropriate, it's unpolitical, or whatever it is. So our wintering part of our menstrual cycle is really powerful, where we do reflect, and yet very much it is seen that we can't be off sick. We cannot be seen to be not performing when we are going through our menstrual cycle in this way. So actually, women harnessing their menstrual cycles can be hugely productive when we are able to ebb and flow through them. And that's why I come back to using things like Mother Nature, spring, summer, autumn, winter as a really practical framework, where we can look out, particularly those of us who live in like the UK, where we have seasons. And recording this at a time of autumn where the leaves are coming off the trees, you know, they're shedding the resources. Mother Nature knows that these trees need to lose their leaves and able to then hibernate through the winter because there's less water around, and all the signs that we know that why that does that. And yet so many businesses and so many commercial environments forget or don't like to use the autumn and winter energies because they're so focused on spring, summer, push, going at it 24/7 all of the time. And yet that's what causes the cortisol problems, the stress problems, the being out of connection with our bodies. Because if Mother Nature was in summer 24/7, 12 months of the year, it just couldn't perform. It needs the autumn, it needs the winter to be able to allow the summer energy to be able to have the resources to be able to grow from. So there's a very beautiful rhythm that we see that happens, that Mother Nature has, and it provides a brilliant framework that we can use in the power of productivity, in the way that we work and develop our rhythms. So that's where my work has come from now, is teaching people around how to access ebb and flow, how to access these different energies in our body. And that's where the embodiment piece comes from, because we can teach it logically, but then when our head just does it logically, it kind of does it. But it's when we're able to access winter energy in our bodies, autumn energy in our bodies, and tune in to it, it just becomes more rhythmical, more flow, it's less push, and it on the outside it might look like we're not working very hard, but we get better results. We get better results every time, without thinking that we're having to be out there looking very busy and super productive.
Not
So
tide, isn't
great.
it? You know, it's going with the tide, using it, you know, as opposed to swimming against the tide. But sometimes, because you'll know there's days when you can just naturally be productive, and the days when you're just so not. And it is maybe having the flexibility. I mean, the challenge, of course, is, you know, I was thinking, like, if you're an Olympian, you can't choose to have the peak part of your menstrual cycle when you're going to be doing your biggest event, right? You know, there's difficulties, aren't there, because of life and
This is it's a great question, because that's what often people, we bring this to the world of work. How can I possibly feel into my ebb energy in the middle of a finance meeting? Because when I'm using a finance meeting, because that is very logic and very pragmatic, when you really start to hone into these, it's actually you can, and it's bringing in a different slowness to it that allows the access of information. So coming back to your Olympian example, I mean, I think probably from a practical logic level, that's why maybe women Olympians might be on the pill all the time, so they don't have that. And of course, it blocks the energy. But if you know that you are going to have your period on at a very important pitch meeting, one is not being frustrated by it. You can't stop it from happening, because then that's what I've often found from personal experience. It's like, oh God, I mean, I no longer bleed. I'm 2 years postmenopausal. I so miss my menstrual cycles. But I used to get terribly frustrated going, oh God, why did my period have to show up today? Which then, of course, raises up the stress and the anxiety about it. And that's not helpful. And we go, okay, like you say, you move with the tides. Okay, my period started. What can I do to make sure I support myself? I liken it to like the weather app, and you open it up and you know it's going to rain. Well, you take an umbrella. There will be some practical things that you can do to support yourself if your body is showing up in a different energy. So when you start to really hone in on it, it's not about fighting it and going, right, I've got to find ways of overcoming it. It's going, okay, it's happening. What can I do that's going to be most helpful for me to ride this out and to be able to access a different energy to help me show up productively in that moment, rather than just trying to push.
Ignore it, isn't it? It's kind of go with it again. So if you would normally go to the gym before, or what, so you'd allow yourself a bit more travel time, or you know, just some planning time, or not overdo it. So you give yourself that little bit more kindness, I suppose, to have that.
Spot on. That's why tracking energy is so important, because when you can track it, you can anticipate it. Now, you know, you can't be absolutely time perfect and saying, oh, my period's going to start at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. We know that doesn't work as a woman, but we can anticipate it. And that's a perfect example about being in tune with your body, is that you're not just going, what's the next thing on my to-do list? Where am I going next? But that's when you're all in your head, and then being surprised that your period has started on the day that you didn't expect it. Because when we're in tune in our bodies, there will be signs that your period is about to start. You get symptoms, you get to recognize it, rather than going, oh, that's just tired, I'm just going to have some more coffee or eat more chocolate. And then you go, oh, my period just started. That's a great example about being in your head. When you track your energy and you track things like menstrual cycle, moon cycles, we've not mentioned that, sleep patterns, you can start to anticipate where your energy flow is going to come and ebb and flow throughout the weeks. And then you become more in tune with your body. You can then adapt your patterns of behavior, like you say, leaving more time, preparing more, eating better food that you know is going to support you in that time that you need it. And you make better decisions in the day-to-day life.
Yeah, and so it makes sense. Doesn't mean people do it, like you say, if we're talking about it. And you are right. So one of the things that got lots of interest was you talked about the moon, and maybe that's kind of, if we talk about this, it may or may not align to the follow-up question, maybe my final-ish question. So understand, so if you're you know, a menstruating female, then you've got your own internal body clock. So for postmenopausal females and for men, what energy cycles would they draw on? And is it the moon, or is there anything other than the moon?
I mean, you can look at things. There's definitely daylight changing throughout the year. I know that impacts people hugely, energy levels. So being aware of when the days get shorter, when the days get longer. The moon is a fascinating, and it's so interesting. There's lots of people who immediately cross their arms and going, "Oh, lot a load of tish tosh. That's probably way too woo woo." Um, we're recording this off the back of a very spicy full moon last week, and it's very interesting. I mean, I got hit so badly. My night sweats came up. It was it was a super full moon as well, which means it was really close to Earth. So when you look at it from a scientific point of view, when you have a full moon close to the planet, you are changing the magnetic influence. We are 70% water. The moon governs the tides. There is no science. No one's been able to prove it scientifically that the moon affects human being behaviors. There is plenty of anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
So what I recommend to people is track your energies and use the moon cycles, and then build your own scientific evidence. Yeah, you may not be affected by the moon, okay? That's fine. One thing I've recognized, and I've spoken to many, many, many women, particularly going through the menopause, is that when you become post-menopause, using the moon cycles can be really helpful to tune in with your natural energy. So we don't tend to have the same hormonal change. Well, we don't have the same hormonal change once we stop menstruating, but we still ebb and flow with our hormones. And sometimes it can feel very random. I experiment on myself, and I know that I will be affected by the moon. And the more postmenopausal I am, the more effect I am getting from particularly full moons. I get incredibly tired. And this time round, because it was a super moon, it knocked me for six. I was having afternoon sleeps, and that's where, going back in my 40s, I would have just pushed through. What am I doing? Just drink some more coffee, have more sugar, just keep
You
pushing.
might not have even noticed it, I guess. So you're almost saying that it's analogous to that's a period when they're having the full moon. Is that it's kind of
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it gives something that is the moon cycle is very predictable. You can look at the moon cycles for the next 100 years. I mean, we know exactly when we're going to get a full moon, we're going to get a new moon. And so it's as much science data that you can put alongside this, for me, adds credibility to it, but also gives us our human beings do need frameworks to be able to help guide us through it. So if to a practical point of view. So I always recommend to people is just track yourself, track your energy flows, have moon as one of the things that you track alongside your sleep, daylight hours, weather. Weather can significantly impact our energy levels as well, and we know what it's been like having a very wet and horrible summer that we've had, and the impact it's had on people's moods. So, it's and menstrual cycles. So when we use that as a track and we collect data alongside how we are rating our flow, patterns will emerge. And then we can start to be more in tune with where that flow is. So we can be a little bit more predictable, bearing in mind that once we think we know what our ebb and flows are going to be, we get older, life things happen to us. It will keep adapting, and we need to build that resilience in ourselves as we go through the decades. So we never find a perfect one that's going to fit for the next 10 years. And that's why it's important just to keep on tracking and keep being physically aware of what our symptoms are and our energy levels. Because if we run out of energy, we will keep pushing through, and that's where our health problems come in.
So we break, and that sort of brings us full circle, doesn't it? I mean, that's so broadly, just being alert to the fact that, so summarizing, that many of us are in our heads. Many of us are probably maybe not even aware of our cycles or any other flows, which are there, whether we ignore them or not. Those things are happening. And then you're saying about, in terms of slowing down to speed up, looking at things which are, I guess there are other things. It can be as simple as exercise and stuff like that for other people, or some people meditation works. But there are things like energy, kinesiology, was it you talked about, sound baths. Maybe try experimenting with some of these other things, track all of our data and see where it impacts into our energy and see if you can find patterns. And incidentally, an anecdote that I would say about the full moon, which is why I don't poo-poo it, is my mum was in a care home for a long time and had dementia. And if you only have to talk to someone who's worked in a care home of dementia patients, and they absolutely believe something happens to the full moon. There's a difference in behaviour, there's sort of the magnetic, whatever it is, but there's definitely a difference in behaviours that people would see consistently in those sort of situations. So you're really saying tracking it down and work out how to put yourself first, to bring your best self out, but don't necessarily, it's not always about 9 to 5, 5 days a week. It's going to flex, being aware and kind to ourselves in terms of that. Any other final points, Karen, that you'd like just to bring this together? I mean, any takeaways for people that you'd like to say, and perhaps point out to you've got some resources, haven't you, that people might want to come to you for?
Yes. Yeah, so if anybody's interested in an energy tracker, I have a analog PDF. There's lots of apps out there. The problem with apps and having things on your phones is that if you're tracking morning and night, to go to bed with your phone and wake up with your phone isn't terribly helpful. So I have an analog PDF that you can print out. So I love getting back into paperwork and doing the energy tracking on paper, pen and paper. If you'd like to get a copy of it, you can go to karenskidmore.com/energy tracker, and you'll be able to download a PDF, and there's instructions on how to use it, and print off your tracker, and it's something you have by the side of your bed morning and night, and collect the data. It's set up as a 28-day one, and I'd say just keep doing it month in, month out, print as many of the sheets out and keep records of them, and it will be very interesting to see what comes through. And the final thing to leave in is, and you've said the words several times, is be kind. This whole process of slowing down, yes, is there to get better results, yes, to help us achieve more things, but when we are kind to ourselves, we're more gentle with ourselves, it's going to improve your health. We have got to the point where as human beings cannot keep up with the productivity expectations that's been put upon us, not just from our bosses and our work culture. I'm talking about everything from our phones, our notifications, AI. We're on a fast track to believing that we are capable of producing more and more and more every single day. And as human beings, our souls are being left behind. So coming back and being kind to ourselves allows us to work better in these high expectations that we live in, and have better relationships with ourselves, our friends and family.
And actually that's part of it, isn't it? You end up putting so much pressure on yourself, you end up losing those things that are the most important when you're saying finding yourself, if you're running so fast to try and keep up. Let's face it, none of us can be like ChatGPT, the speed at which that can generate stuff. So it's therefore,
oh my goodness,
but it can't yet have relationships with our nearest and dearest. So that's focusing on those things that are more important. Karen, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really wonderful to hear again and talk to people directly to you about all of this thinking, a real fresh way of looking at things. I'll put your link to your energy tracker on our show notes for anybody who didn't grab it. So I much appreciate you coming on the HR Uprising podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.